Whether you have a chronic condition or periodic headaches, the quality of pharmaceuticals affects every American. To ensure a stellar end product, every step of the process must be held to a high standard, from ingredient sourcing to labeling. These guidelines are called the Current Good Manufacturing Practice Regulations. The FDA uses them to guarantee accurate design, monitoring, and control of manufacturing processes and facilities so that every product is safe and reliable.
The good manufacturing practices, the GMPs, as the FDA calls them, were written explicitly to ensure consistently high-quality drugs leaving facilities. So the FDA chose to, a long time ago, to manage quality through the process versus the products. They don't do a lot of product testing. Instead, they go and inspect the process both before they approve a facility to produce a drug and then ongoing. It's supposed to be about every 2 years.
That's John Gray, a Dean's Distinguished Professor of Operations and Business Analytics at The Ohio State University. Despite the FDA's oversight, there's been various reports of GMP violations at facilities in India. In fact, a 2019 book by Catherine Ebon exposed Indian generic drug companies for purposefully deceiving and defrauding customers with low-quality products. However, Gray says many of the violations aren't officially recorded, partly because it's extremely difficult to access the data. The pharmaceutical industry is notoriously private when it comes to where their drugs are produced, and they're not required to disclose that information to consumers.
I believe that it does serve some in the industry well to have a lack of transparency and to have all consumers and providers believe that there is absolutely no difference between all of the possible generic drugs they might take for a given condition.
There's not supposed to be a difference, but just like with any other industry, things fall through the cracks. But when quality drops in this business, it can be life or death for consumers. Gray and his team stumbled across a gold mine of information that helped them piece together data that's often kept hidden from researchers.
We were actually working on a grant with the FDA at that time and kind of got a hint that, hey, there's a California law that requires drug companies to put the facility in their label. Go kind of look that way. And we found the law, but still that didn't make it obvious as to how to go about to do this.
Thankfully, Gray's PhD student was able to dig through a bunch of labels on Daily Med, the National Library of Medicine's database of the most recent labeling. But unlike the nutrition information on the side of a cereal box, the labeling for prescription drugs are each 20, 30, even 40 pages long for one product. Gray says many of them identified their manufacturers through a DUNS number, which is a unique business tag created by the credit bureau Dun & Bradstreet.
It's a number that if you subscribe or your library subscribes to the database, you can type it in and then it will give you the facility information. And that was structured in a way that he was able to automatically extract more than half of the drugs. He was able to find where the production was located, and then through a little more manual effort was able to get a higher percentage.
It wasn't 100%, but this novel source of data gave them much more than other researchers have had access to. Gray and his team used this information to compare the number of serious adverse events caused by generic prescription drugs made in different locations. While various American facilities have had issues with GMP compliance, Gray's analysis, published in the journal Production and Operations Management, reveals that the same drugs coming out of India seem to be much riskier for consumers.
The adverse events data is messy. And then this is a model predicted number, but the number we quote in the paper is about a 50% higher incidence of adverse events than if we're coming from the same drug from India, controlling for volume, most importantly, but also controlling for other facility and drug characteristics, compared to, again, the exact same active ingredient, dosage form, and route of administration from a domestically produced drug. So that's kind of the valid number, most carefully constructed number is about that 50% higher. If you read the paper closely, we put a lot of cautions around that because, again, the adverse events database is messy.
The FDA cautions against using its adverse events reporting system as a sole indicator of drug quality because the reports haven't been medically verified. However, the FDA does use this same database as a tool for post-market surveillance to identify drug safety issues.
These adverse events seem to be the best, certainly publicly available. We know the FDA uses them from all of our work with the FDA, but I don't know exactly how they use them.
Interestingly, this data was able to reveal an interesting pattern. Most of the serious adverse events could be linked back to older drugs.
If you look at the drugs, the newer generic drugs, there actually wasn't a statistically significant difference, whereas for the drugs that were older than the median, which was about 8 years, That was really where the result was coming from. And that's kind of interesting because if you think of most industries, you would think companies would get better, through the learning curve, they would get better and better at making the products that they're making. But in this industry, the older drugs, the drugs that have kind of run the race to the bottom.
With so much secrecy within the industry, Gray says the buyer's purchasing decisions are limited mostly to which product is cheapest. And since all generic drug manufacturers are required to use the same active ingredients, dosage form, and route of administration as the name brand, it seems like a win-win. That is, until manufacturers stop adhering to the GMP regulations.
By the time a drug's been on the market for a long time, the winners are the lowest cost manufacturers. And that narrative has been out there for quite a while. And this result is incredibly consistent with that. But it's really interesting to think about. Like in most industries, you'd expect the survivors that are still manufacturing something and have won the business after years and years of something being in the market would be the best manufacturers, highest quality manufacturers. But that doesn't seem to be the case here.
Gray's best guess as to why the pharmaceutical industry's trends drastically differ from others is simple: money. It's cheaper to not fully comply with GMPs, which means more competitive pricing and higher profit margins. The FDA does have inspections to make sure all facilities are up to code, but while domestic inspections are unannounced, they've historically given advance notice to foreign facilities.
That's quite a different environment, right? If you're going to get a few months' notice that the FDA might be coming or is going to be coming, say, in 3 months from now, you have time to kind of clean things up a little bit. And if you know the exact date they're coming, you have time to even, have the right employees at the facility that will answer the questions well and the best trained employees and things like that. Because the FDA inspections are quite thorough. I mean, the FDA comes in and talks to employees on the floor. They look at records, they get into the computer systems, but you have time to clean that up. Whereas if they just show up unannounced and then they have the right to enter the facility immediately, you're just caught in your normal state. And so these pre-announced inspections allow the normal state maybe to be a little less than ideal. And then when the inspector arrives, for you to be a little above your normal state and maybe not be forced then to fix problems because maybe they're not detected.
Earlier this year, the FDA recently announced plans to expand its surprise inspections to foreign facilities that produce food, drugs, and medical products for American consumers. Additionally, investigators will no longer be able to accept travel accommodations from regulated industry members. While it's unclear when this plan will go into effect, it's a big step towards solving these drug quality issues. Gray says another important shift would be increasing the transparency so that buyers know where their products are being made.
We prefer location and quality transparency because we don't want, if we just do location transparency, there would be a bias or tendency toward domestic manufacturing and maybe a bias against India and China specifically. But there are good manufacturers in India and China. And so if we do location and quality transparency, now a valid and reliable quality metric needs to be created. The FDA probably has a reasonable one, but I don't think they're going to release it. And then a high quality Indian manufacturer could still compete and a low quality domestic manufacturer would be challenged. And so we could still have this global supply chain, which I think is necessary and appropriate, but we would not have this cost only buying practice and this race to the bottom being run.
However, Gray mentions that it'll be hard to create true change without some reform on the buyer side. In pharmaceuticals, the buyers aren't the consumers. They're often pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, who are negotiating and purchasing on behalf of pharmacies and insurance companies.
The consumers or the doctors might notice where the drugs are located or that they're a 4-star rated drug instead of a 5-star rated drug or something like that. But it'll be difficult for them to do anything if their insurance company only covers these 2 NDCs for this treatment. And so a bigger thing is and it's a harder thing. Transparency is relatively easy. It would be easy to write down the mandate for transparency. I'm not saying it'd be easy to implement, but it'd be easy to imagine, right? It's easy to imagine doing unannounced inspections. We've already done pilots. We know how to do it, right? But fixing the middle of the pharmaceutical supply chain between the manufacturers and the consumers is pretty hard. There's really powerful entities in the middle there.
He's not saying it's impossible, but it'll require some elbow grease to get to the real change that'll help American consumers. You can find more information about John Gray and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.